Hi everyone, this is Chrissy at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. Today I'm so thrilled to be joined by Liza Mundy. She is a journalist and an author of the book Code Girls. Thank you so much for being here and spending time with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be at the museum and certainly great to be in New Orleans.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, I'm so glad that we get a chance to talk today about your wonderful book, Code Girls, and really dig into the interesting stories. So I guess let's start off the conversation today. Tell me about some of the more remarkable stories that you encountered as you were doing your research for this book.
The whole story is remarkable in the sense this was 10,000 women, more than 10,000 women who back in 1942, 43, 44, were recruited or answered ads to leave their small towns, to come to Washington, D.C. from all over the country to do top secret work. Many of them didn't even know what the work was going to be when they got to Washington. And one of the first things that they were told when they got to Washington was that they would be shot and killed if they talked about their work, because it was wartime. This was top secret intelligence work, and the penalty for talking about top secret intelligence work during wartime, it was an act of treason, so the penalty was death. So it really, every woman in and of herself was an extraordinary story. The central character of my book, Dot Braden, was a school teacher, and so many of the women were school teachers. And she answered an ad and went to a recruiting table during the war, and before she knew it, within a matter of weeks, she was on her first train ride ever to Washington, D.C., coming to Washington, and she was breaking Japanese codes within a matter of weeks. And so the U.S. Navy contacted math professors and astronomy professors and said, pinpoint your best students for us. They were looking for young women who had mathematical ability, but also were good at languages, because that really helps. But they were also looking for hardworking young women with what we today would call grit. You know, you hear today a lot about resilience or grit, the ability to get up every morning and tackle a problem over and over again, deal with failure, deal with disappointment, not get discouraged, and that's what they were looking for as well. So those women would be called in one by one by a math professor, a dean of students, and they would be asked two questions. Do you like crossword puzzles, and are you engaged to be married?
Wow.
And if they were, it was like getting the Harry Potter letter, okay? It was like getting that letter saying, you're going to do something different than what you thought you were going to be doing with your life.
Just with those two questions, change your life, right?
You're invited into this secret society, because it was top secret. And so the women who were recruited in college as seniors, they would be asked those questions, and if they said, yes, I like crossword puzzles, no, I'm not engaged to be married, then they would be invited to take a secret training course to learn how to become code breakers. And they couldn't tell their roommates, they couldn't tell their brothers or their boyfriends or their parents or anybody that they were training for a completely different future and career path than the one they had expected, and it really was like the Harry Potter letter. I mean, they were practically learning how to become magicians in a way.
So, I mean, you talk about this work being so top secret, but, you know, we're 75 years post-World War II. Why is this story still unknown, really, today, other than maybe your book now, of course?
That is a great question, why it was unknown for so long. It was top secret during the war, because you don't want the enemy to know that you've broken their code system. You don't want the Germans to know. You don't want the Japanese to know, because then they'll change their codes and you can't read the messages anymore. So that's why it was top secret during the war. And then what happened right after the war? We thought we were going to stop breaking codes and listening to enemy messages, but we moved into the Cold War. And all of a sudden, you know, our enemies were the Russians or the Communist Chinese or, you know, communists in Cuba. So we were still breaking messages, and we didn't want the world to know how good we now were at that job.
So what do you think are some of the lessons that, especially like students, can learn from these women that did this job and then had to keep it a secret for so long, but they did remarkable work? What could they learn from them?
So it's important to remember that World War II was really the birth of our computer industry. This was the they were pioneering what we would call STEM field, right? Science, technology, education, and math. They were programming early computers. The code-breaking women were also, people now have heard of Grace Hopper. She was programming and designing the Navy's computer. There were women designing computers for the Army because the men were fighting. We're all fighting. And we were beginning to develop computers to do code breaking, to calculate weapons trajectories, computers that would eventually send us to the moon. And it was women often who were doing this work. So you hear today about trying to get women into STEM. No, it's getting women back into STEM because women pioneered the field. After the war, they were pushed out of the workforce. They were told to go home. It became a profitable field after the war, and so men came in. So it's really important to remember that STEM this isn't a new thing, getting women into STEM, that women helped create this field and pioneered early computers. So that's important. This is a home field for girls and for women, and don't let anybody tell you differently.
Well, Liza, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
And for chatting with me.
Great. Great to be here.